and welcome in to the newest edition of Caught Stealing, the fantasy baseball podcast here at Fantasy Alarm. I am Colby Conway at Colby R. Conway, and with me this week is James Grande at the_real_Grande. Matt Sell's getting a well-deserved vacation, though I do believe he's going to a couple of games. Either I believe it's this week. I think coming right out of the break, they're heading to some games, so maybe he's doing some scouting for the podcast. So maybe it's not truly a vacation. He's not doing a vacation like I do a vacation, where I'm separating. I'm beachside, I'm chilling, or I'm in the mountains. There's no kind of difference. But he actually deserved this vacation. Matt Sells at the Sellsman over on X has been crushing the NASCAR racing DFS scene. So filling in the third man of the podcast at the_real_Grande. So James, how is everything going for you?
Doing well. I really at this point is it Julio Franco that no. Who is the most pinch hit home runs of all time?
I think you do.
Well, I'm definitely up there at this point. But whoever that is, I want to is it Julio Franco?
Let's see. I'm looking at this baseball almanac. That seems legit. Most pinch hit home runs. Matt Stairs.
I'm Matt Stairs. Honestly, I'm Matt Stairs at this point.
Former Pittsburgh great. That makes sense. Yep. Two pinch hit home runs
Everything
with
comes back.
Pittsburgh.
Everything comes back to the Pirates. I'm doing good. Salute to Sells. Sells has quite the trip planned. He is getting like tours of Wrigley Field. He's getting like press box access to Wrigley Field. So salute to him and his wife having a lot of fun out there, catching I think Sells' second favorite team or third favorite team. Sells has way too many favorite teams. Just gonna throw it out there. You can only have one favorite team. Just let's get that out of the way. But his wife's favorite team, the Arizona Diamondbacks, one of her 7 favorites, I'm sure, in the Sells family. But doing great. Thank you for having me on the show. Ready to get back into some baseball. It's been obviously a small break we've had, a fun first half, an interesting first half of baseball, I would say. But ready to get into the second half and get back on track with everything, and with trade deadline right around the corner as well. And so there's going to be a lot of interesting second half moves by teams, by players. So ready to talk through it all.
Yeah, and we'll definitely dive into the trade deadline here a little bit today, as well as we get closer to the deadline at the end of the month and the fantasy impact that will come from it. But with the All-Star break itself, obviously we had a pretty electric home run derby. I know it's quite a polarizing event for many. I do miss the old days of you knew by the championship was maybe starting by 11 o'clock. Maybe the final round was. Personally, for an avid baseball fan, I do think the slow go of the derby with the moonshot home runs, take a swing, watch 4 pitches, take a swing, is still fun. I know for the new age, quicker is better, move things along is more fun. I didn't really have that big of a gripe with the format this year. I kind of enjoyed it. I thought it was a nice blend. If it were up to me, I would go back to the old, let's do this for 4.5 hours and make it a whole night affair. But I don't have as many gripes with the Derby format this year as many kind of almost seem to have.
I think because you are a baseball fan and because you grew up watching baseball, and I'm not just saying you, but like people that watch baseball understand that it is a long game. People that have played baseball understand that there's not a lot you can do to speed things up, whether it's home run derby, whether it's regular season game, whether it's postseason game. Like baseball is going to be baseball in its purest form when it's played like baseball and things aren't being sped up. But it is understandable just in general context that when things are slower, people of today's generation that are growing up don't care because it's taking too long and everything is now automated. You go into a restaurant and you just place your order on the thing. You don't have to talk to a waiter because people don't want to wait, right? It's just so I get it and I agree with you to some extent. Um but people that we're trying to grow the game, I get why you want to start things earlier, why things are taking less time. Because, like, it is fun. But also, I've joined East Coast Dad now, and I don't want the final round to start at 11 p.m. So, like, I think there's a lot of different contexts of that argument. First, people who just enjoy baseball for what it is, people who are now parents that don't want to stay up until 1 a.m. to watch the end of the home run derby. But um, I'm also kind of like old man on the porch when it comes to All Star festivities these days. And in general, I just want to watch the regular competition in like a 9 inning baseball game, or this slam dunk contest isn't the same as it used to be. It's just my stance on all-star festivities in general. I think they've all dropped off tremendously in terms of, like, how good the product is.
I always like the Derby too because I always like to see the pitchers that are throwing.
Yeah,
Shout
like
out Bobby Witt.
Robinson Cano's dad when he won the
Yeah.
derby, like, that was super cool, but, like
Yeah, but shout out Bobby Witt for having a lefty. That was awesome. I appreciated that. Shout out Pete Alonso for having a guy throwing lollipops in there. Then shout out to Alec Boehm's dude who was trying to get a job with an MLB team as a seventh inning arm. He
hey,
was full blown. I mean, I think he was throwing at max effort. I think that's what he had in the tank, and that's what he was bringing forth. Like I can't imagine like just sitting there off to the side. It's like Alec Boehm steps up, first guy in the Derby. The the
longest
uh,
odds
the
longest
long shot
odds.
odds, and then you go up there and watch the first pitch, and you're like, his BP dude's throwing 82. God forbid he hits a corner.
Yeah.
This guy's gonna be getting looked at by the A's or the White Sox. They need some arms.
Hey, oh, unnecessary shots. You could have thrown the Pirates in there.
Whoa, 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 whoa. No, they're good now.
They're good now. Yeah. Yeah, they're good now. Yeah, totally.
I mean, why would I throw jabs at a team that's 500 at the metaphorical first part of the break of the season? They're 48 and 48. The White
That's
Sox would
it.
kill to be 48 and 80, 48 and 40, 48 and 88.
I've
God,
never understood.
I hope Pittsburgh doesn't get to 48 and 88 or I'm going to be unbearable. They go
That
on a
is
40-game losing streak to open the second half.
That would be quite disappointing. That would be quite tough. We'd actually do that would probably be the most Pirates talk we do
Oh,
on the show,
I
right?
go on so many vacations during that losing streak. I would not be
Sure.
here.
Hey, salute to the Pirates I feel like we're about this record last year, and then we saw what happened in the second half last year.
Well, history doesn't repeat itself. That's what they always say. So that will not be happening this year. And of course, we did have Livy Dunn's boyfriend open the All-Star game for the National League, carved up the hitters. Slider needs a little work, left that baby arm side, but that splinker is nice. And shout out Livy Dunn for saying that she's more of a splinker girl. I'll give her a lot of credit for that. I thought that was a dope comment I believe it was on the red carpet when they were talking about it. But I mean, Pittsburgh set up for generations here
Yep.
with him, Jared Jones, Goat Mitch Keller. They're in a really good spot for years to come, as well as these draft picks.
Martin Perez as well.
Okay, so other things that are happening with with the All Star game, Jared Duran obviously hit the home run. Shohei Ohtani hit an absolute moon ball, and it's pretty much what we saw. And I think one of the main things that I took away from the Derby and the game, these Dodgers players are out there recruiting and lobbying. They knew what they were there to do. They didn't give a you know what about that game and that Derby. They were there. They were talking to buddies. You know, Teoscar got to bring Vladdy Jr. over. They're talking to other dudes. The Dodgers are building a super team, and they might be in the market for one of these top arms. So, do you actually think the Dodgers make a move for one of these top lefties in Skubal or Mr. Garrett Crochet?
Think that if they want to win the World Series, they have to, because
Yes.
their pitching has not been what they expected it to be, and to be honest, like, they have what it takes to get necessary arms. Now, like, I'm not quite sure what Detroit's thinking overall with like this Scooble talk. But if you're gonna get I think it was Heyman that tweeted out the other day that was talking about like the package necessary to get Tarek Scooble, and it was basically like the Juan Soto package where you're getting Mackenzie Gore and you're getting CJ Abrams and you're getting like these top fledged, and then you have all the players still in the minor leagues, the whole package. Like, he has literally been the best pitcher in baseball, and I think we're both going to talk about that later on in the show. But why, if you're the Tigers, and it's the same thing for Crochet, like, you can rebuild with these players, and I understand that you want to get pieces back, but if you're either one of those franchises and you're going to ship out a Garrett Crochet or Tarek Skubal to the Dodgers, you need to get Bobby Miller plus 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 plus, or you need to get Gavin Stone plus 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 plus. And I guess that's where if you're the Dodgers, like, it's kind of tough because Bobby Miller's been really bad this year and Walker Bueller has given you nothing. And you're like, well, man, I have to get one of these guys. We spent a gazillion dollars this offseason. Yamamoto's down. What is Kershaw going to provide when he returns? Like, it's
Mhm.
just question marks. So, yeah, I think they have to. Do I think they do? I do, because they're the Dodgers. And as a fan of a market such as the Dodgers, as a Yankees fan, I always expect that, right? So, like, I think you kind of have to have that expectation, especially after seeing the money that they shipped out this offseason. They are they're all in. Period. There's no if and or buts about it.
And don't be surprised if Scooble does get moved if the package is massive because he is
Yep.
under team control. He doesn't become a free agent until after the 2026 season.
But like, if you're the Tigers, like, you put on your GM hat, are you trading like are you trading Tarek Skubal now, or like, what is your opinion? Like, I just don't understand why you would do such a thing instead of rebuilding with him.
Agreed. I mean, you should probably keep him around. It's one of those things, though, for the Tigers. If depending on the package, and like I think I saw the tweet, it might be the one that you're referencing, or it could be a separate one. But it's one of those things where everybody does have a price. Like you'll
Right.
take a look and see that, and maybe it's I don't know if they have not necessarily concerns, but like, are they going to pay for them when the time comes? Maybe they already know that they're not, just
Sure.
because it's going to be a massive, like, is Detroit going to do a
Sure.
$300 million deal? Maybe not. It just might not happen. So,
Sure.
like, could they do something like send them to Baltimore, get a package headlined around Kobe Mayo? Do they do something like that? Which you kind of look at Detroit, and if we had Sells on, we could talk about the farm system for them. But when you think, if you were to start naming Tigers players after Scooble, chances are you're probably going to be naming primarily hitters. Like I go
Yes.
to Colt
Correct.
Keith, Riley Green. I start going to players like that. Like a pitcher doesn't necessarily come up right away for me. I
No.
would get to Jack Flaherty eventually, but I mean, he's not in the long
Right.
term plan. So I think you at least explore it. And if a team is going to like, if and it's one of those things where Sells always talks about the Dodgers. They could trade their top 4 prospects and still have a top 5 system. Like
I
that's
know.
just where they're at. So like if it comes down to it, and eventually that Shohei Otani contract is going to chip in and kick in, and I just ultimately see it's like the Dodgers are on this like 8 to 10 year plan where they're going to try to win as many titles as possible. Ownership is out, and that next decade is going to be for all intents
Disaster.
a shit storm.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
gonna have no money because they're all going to players that aren't even playing anymore. But hey, banners fly forever. And if they win 6 in the next 10 years, no
Sure.
one, the next 10 years they are what they are.
Sure.
So
Agreed.
a lot of interesting stuff that could happen at the deadline. We'll dive into it a little bit more. Of course, we're going to have a plethora of relievers move because that's just the market at the deadline. And maybe we'll even see some hitters move, maybe like a Pete Alonso, because we know the Astros are sniffing around the first base market. But we'll see what all happens there. We'll have you covered here at the Fantasy Alarm, the Caught Stealing podcast here. So, James, let's jump into some first half fantasy superlatives. Keep it easy breezy cover girl, really light here as we talk about some awards from the first half that we're doling out. I'm going to go first with my fantasy MVP. I really wanted to go Bobby Witt just because I like him a lot. I'm biased. Really wanted him to win the Derby. You can also
Same.
look at maybe a particular guy in Cincy, but the one I'm going to go to Gunnar Henderson. I know shortstop is relatively deep for all intents and purposes, but he's got a 957 OPS. We're at 28 home runs and 14 stolen bases. He's been the key part of this very, very good Baltimore team. All the numbers are good. He's helping across the board and exquisite numbers in all categories. And I mean, if we double these numbers, we're looking at almost a 50-30 season for Gunnar Henderson. So for me, if we're going to take a look, if we're going to count draft value in just a little bit into the MVP discussion, obviously it's like in reality, probably not giving it to Shohei is just probably dumb just with how good he's been. But if we're going to take a little bit of draft value in, just because I feel like on talk shows, you have to purposefully disagree on certain things anyway, I'm going to go to Gunnar Henderson. I just think what he's done has been phenomenal. So
Yeah.
that's my fantasy MVP.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at some preseason ADP. He's the 30th player off the board.
Yep.
And my MVP was the 13th player off the board according to NFFC, and it's the guy you just mentioned,
Yep.
Shohei Ohtani. It's like there's obviously neither of those answers are incorrect. I
Yep.
think Gunner started the year. I believe he started the year with he might still have it, the multi-position eligibility, and obviously he's shifted to the one position. Shohei is kind of limited because we're not getting the pitching aspect, but he has been. I saw a Freezing Takes tweet this morning actually about Shohei Ohtani in 2018. They said he was basically a minor league hitter, um, and all he's good for is pitching, and obviously that's really has held to the test of to the time, because he's not good at hitting. Right? He has he's only has the most fantasy points in all of baseball, just hitting. 29 home runs is second in baseball. He has 75 runs. That's second in baseball. He has over 1,000 OPS. Oh, he has 23 stolen bases too. I don't know if that's good or not, but for a guy who has 29 home runs at the break, but that seems pretty good. So I'm just gonna chalk answer, like you said. It's like, can you go wrong with Shohei Ohtani? No, so I'm not. I'm just gonna take the chalk and move on. And I'll be different elsewhere, but I'm just gonna say Shohei Ohtani blanket statement could just have been the MVP for every year. I mean, it's just one of those things, right? He could just be your
Mhm.
MVP in real life and fantasy MVP year in year out. And now it's just like, oh, we get to see how good he is only offensively when the allure of his MVP reigns the last couple of years. Well, he does both at elite level. Well, now it's like, oh, well, now he's better than everyone at just hitting. That's kind of not fair.
Yep, and you could give an honorable mention too to like a Ellie De La Cruz type as
Yep.
well. But ultimately, when
Yep.
it comes to Otani, top 5 in qualified hitters and home runs.
Yep.
He is 6th in RBI. He is tied for 4th in stolen bases, 4th highest batting average, 2nd best OPS. He's just near the top of everything. Can't go wrong. Hey, if it's chalk, but you're not wrong. So ultimately, that's where it comes down to. So let's move on to the best pitcher overall so far. And we've already talked about him for me.
Yep.
It's Mr. Scooble of the Tigers. I mean, just flat out dominant this year. He only has 21 walks across 116 innings, 2.41 ERA with a .88 WHIP. I'm looking here amongst qualified pitchers. We have 13 with an ERA below 3. Only about 5 dudes have a WHIP below 1, and that's the Logan Gilbert, Zach Wheeler, Chris Sale, Ronel Blanco, and Tariq Skubal, 190 batting average against. And what I think is really good for Skubal, it's actually top 5 in strikeouts too.
Yep.
There is a chance here, depending if he's not going to double his workload, but he gets to 200 innings, he could sniff about 250 strikeouts. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Dude's filthy. So for me, he's the best pitcher overall, and I just can't imagine him getting traded. It's going to be a hell of a package if he gets dealt.
That's why I just don't understand it. He has been the best pitcher in baseball. He has the most fantasy points. He has 10 wins. He has the third most quality starts with 14 quality starts in the first half. I mean,
Mhm.
dude, there has been nothing. The velocity is like up. I mean, he was touching 100 in starts prior to the All Star break. He has been everything and more. Um, and he wasn't expensive.
Yep.
I mean, when you, especially when you're talking like, he was the 13th pitcher off the board in 12 team leagues. He was going late fourth, early fifth round. I mean, we're talking about just insane value on a guy that is shoulders above everyone else. Right? And there's obviously been like quality starters around him,
Mhm.
but he leads in every category. So yeah, I think Tarek Skubal far and away has been the best pitcher in baseball.
Yeah, I would give honorable mention to like a Logan Gilbert type. Could throw Zach Wheeler in there as well. And if we're going to look solely at ERA, I mean, Seth Lugo's at 11 wins with a sub 2.5 ERA as well. So
He's been great for my fantasy one of my fantasy rosters. It's been extremely lucky if you look at some of those peripheral numbers. But
sure.
you know what? Salute to the 35-year-old Seth Lugo who's figured it out in the middle of his career.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the best value hitter. So we are going to take some draft capital into this. And I'm actually going to go back to an article that I wrote in the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Baseball Draft Guide. Hopefully you had your hands on it here. And here is a sentence that I wrote about a particular outfielder. And let's see if you can guess it just based off the very limited information you're getting here. But I said, due to the strikeout rate, I'm sorry, let me start. Nonetheless, I'm intrigued by potential development in his offensive profile at the best park for hitters in Major League Baseball, and he's a great source of cheap speed. Due to the strikeout rate that is destined to be north of 30%, he's a bit of a liability in terms of batting average, but the speed is legit and will be his biggest contribution to fantasy managers. If things go right for name redacted, in 2024. He could hit 12 to 15 home runs and get into the mid to upper 20s with his stolen base total.
He's
What
already
I
at both those. He's
what I
already at both.
forgot to leave out was I forgot to just put at the first half. That is what I forgot to leave out. I'm saying Brenton Doyle
Yep.
for Colorado. He was dirt cheap in drafts. At the time I was writing it, his ADP was outside of the top 500. And all he's done so far, 15 home runs, 20 stolen bases in 92 games, hitting 276 with a 343 on base percentage. And I said the strikeout rate was destined to be north of 30%. It's at 24.9% for the year. He's cut the strikeout rate. The walk rate is up. His whiff rate is still a little high, but it's a smidge more manageable. Last year was in the 4th percentile. This year he's tracking at the 23rd percentile, but zone contact is up. He's leaving the zone a little bit less. Even I, as bullish as I was coming into the season on Doyle, even I couldn't have predicted this. So this is not necessarily a full-blown victory lap. I'm just as surprised as many because I did not. This is his numbers now are what I envisioned at year's end with about 40 points off the batting average. So there's definitely a little bit, if you look a little bit under the hood, you look at some of the numbers that I see here. I mean, even his expected batting average of 260 is pretty strong. Like all of the numbers are holding strong. I do think there might be a little bit of regression in the batting average here in the second half, but ultimately Doyle's been absolutely phenomenal. He's already given you insane ROI. It should only increase the rest of the way. So best value hitter overall in drafts this year for me, Mr. Brenton Doyle.
Yeah, Sells and I have him on our FSGA team that heads into the break in first. And I think we had like a 40 stolen base lead on the field. Obviously, like having him, Jaron Duran, Renhefo, and Lane Thomas helps, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Brent Doyle's been as good of a fantasy asset and like known for the glove, right? Like that was what he
Mm-hmm.
was in Colorado for. He was in Colorado because he's an elite center fielder with speed. And you're like, well, if that guy can develop a bat, dude, he had like a 3 home run game a couple weeks ago. And you're like, oh. And then he had like 5 home runs in 3 games, and you're like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you said the expected numbers aren't like really suggesting like much
Not
dip
major.
though. It's so like even if a slight drop off, like you said, I mean, we're at 15 and 20. We were pacing for, I mean, he's 20 35 guy easy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I love the Brenton Doyle call. My fantasy sleeper or my best value out is going to be an outfielder as well. It's Brent Rooker. I mentioned him earlier.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone expected Brent Rooker to do this again because like we've seen guys leave a team, left Minnesota, go to Oakland, just having free reign, right? He's going to play every day because it's Oakland. They're terrible. And they have a big year. They go to the All-Star game. Not repeatable, right? We've actually seen this a couple times. Adolis Garcia over the last couple years has done it where it's like, oh, he can't do it again, right? And then you're like, you look up, it's like 30 and 20 again. You're like, oh, he did it again. Brent Rooker at the end of the first half, 21 home runs, 44 runs scored, 62 RBIs. And I would say the 44 runs, 62 RBIs would be higher in any other offense across baseball if he's not playing for the Oakland Athletics. I mean, we're talking about a guy 573 slug, 399 WOBA. His expected WOBA 387 is right on par with what it is. Obviously, like the strikeout rate is what the strikeout rate is, but like
Sure.
who cares? Like that's baseball everywhere. Like a 30% strikeout rate is the new norm. And if you're getting that type of production for a guy who was drafted 178th amongst all utility players, he was where are we at outfielders? He was number now I have to look. I scrolled right past him. He was the 50 plus 50, 60th outfielder drafted on NFFC.
Mm-hmm.
73rd outfielder drafted on NFFC this year, 290th overall. And you're talking about a guy who's top 15 amongst all utility options in fantasy. I think Brent Rooker has been amazing. We'll see how they get. Oakland has been better offensively. The lineup around him has provided more. Lawrence
Mm-hmm.
Butler, Zach Geloff has ended the first half good. Like there's a lot more opportunity for Rooker to ascend his numbers even further if he's not moved, which I feel like he would be a pretty valuable trade commodity if someone comes calling for amount of power he has. But I love what Brent Rooker has provided for Oakland this first half.
He's 7 RBI away from his total from last year. And don't sleep on those 5 stolen bases. He
5
already
stolen
has
bases as well.
2.
Right.
Could be I mean, he could be a 30-10 guy. Probably will be if he gets the
Probably will.
steals there. A couple of other names that I think probably are worth noting that I kind of kicked around a little bit. Christopher Morel has been pretty decent. The batting average sucks, but the power has been legit. And I think the other one who's really come on strong is Alec Burleson out in St. Louis.
Dude, so good.
Yep.
So good.
He's been quite good to say the least. And overall, he would be a pretty good value hitter there. So if we can move over to the best value pitcher we're taking apart into draft capital, we talked about Seth Lugo a little bit. He was one I definitely considered. And as I continue looking at some of the names here on this list, the one that I keep coming back to, he may not have been drafted as low as some of the other guys ahead of him, but I'm going to go to Cutter Crawford. He was a guy I was in on. Sure, he's only 6-7, but ERA is right around 3. A lot of the numbers look good, almost trying to strike out per inning. He's helping your ratios for the most part. Only had a 1.04 whip, which amongst qualified starters is actually just outside the top 10. So for me, it's Cutter Crawford. You could easily make a case for his teammate Tanner Houck, but I'm going to go with Cutter Crawford. I think he's been one of the best value pitchers overall. That's where I
Yeah,
go.
I think Boston's staff in general,
Yep.
probably outside of Bayo, has been incredibly good when they weren't expected to. I think that
Mhm.
was what everyone thought Boston needed going into the season, and I think they've answered a lot of questions. So I like that call. I think that this is a. I thought this was the easiest one. I went Chris Sale
Mm,
because he has been not like I understand like where you Chris Sale was the 48th pitcher in NFFC drafts this year. 48th pitcher, 48.
yep.
He is a top 3 fantasy pitcher this year. He is as good as he was during those years in Chicago, and like we just forgot because he hasn't been healthy. But like when you're talking about like fantasy and like evaluating players, like it's very hard to separate a player from injuries when they're continuously injured, but it's also one of those things that you have to try not to do. Like you can't go into a year being like, I'm not going to draft Chris Sale because he's been injured the last 3 years. Like what if Chris Sale, I mean, and look what happens. Like, what if Chris Sale stays healthy? And now the what if is being answered. He's been one of the best fantasy pitchers in baseball, and if we knew that going into the year, he would have been a top 10, top 5 starter drafted if we can ever just see this guy healthy. He went to a new team with an elite offense behind him. Obviously, that offense hasn't been elite, and that hasn't deterred Chris Sale from being as good as he's been. Um, so as soon as I saw like this, I immediately went to the draft boards and I was like, where was Chris Sale taken? Because I know the guy that is. I mean, we talked about Tarek Skubal being the best fit pitcher in baseball, right? Chris Sale scored 13 less fantasy points than him in the
Yep.
first half. That's it, 13. Like he's 13-3 this year with 140 strikeouts, the same amount that Tarek Skubal had. So, um, I think it's really hard to look at Chris Sale as SP 48 and not think that that was maybe the in pitchers or batters the best value on the board
Mhm.
overall. And obviously you can go further down the list and find guys, but I
Sure.
think Chris Sale has been as good as he's ever been.
Sure. And some other guys you could look at too. I mean, we talked about Seth Lugo. You got Renell Blanco. Obviously, you do have Garrett Crochet that you could throw in there as well. A lot of options there on the mound. Talk about a lot of value pitchers that we could have selected from. For me, for biggest bust, there were 2 that were front and center.
Yep.
I think they stood out the most. I'm just going to go with the one that's higher drafted. I'm going to Corbin Carroll.
Same. Ditto.
First pick or first round pick, as high I think is like you could probably 4th or 5th, maybe 5th in drafts.
I think NFFC has him 5th overall.
Yeah. And you look, I mean, sure, he's hitting 212 on the year. You could point to some of the expected numbers and say there's maybe some potential juice there. And I mean, sure, but the barrel rate is putrid. First round pick to have 5 home runs and 18 stolen bases with a 212 average right now and a 301 OBP. That is simply not going to get it done. Biggest bust of the year. And I know you mentioned that you were the same there. So I'll just kind of mention the other one that I had as well. I was stuck between Corbin Carroll and Bo Bichette.
Ugh.
Those were the 2 multi-category producers coming into the year. That's what we expected. We've gotten nothing from either of them. At the very least, hear me out here. you can at least point to Corbin Carroll getting you a couple stolen bases. 18. Bo Bichette is hitting 222 with 4 home runs and 5 stolen bases. That is what we are looking at with Bo Bichette. So for me, it was Corbin Carroll and Bo Bichette light years ahead of anybody else.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think the only other name before he ended the first half strong was Julio Rodriguez, just simply because he did kind of similar to Corbin Carroll. He was drafted in the top 5, right? Like those are 2 of your top 5 draft picks. I completely agree. As a Bo Bichette owner and rosterer, I completely agree on the front. He has been dreadful. I feel like this was a pretty straightforward category. It's if you're looking at a first round pick that has been disappointed, it's Carroll or Rodriguez, and more Carroll because Rodriguez ended the first half strong, or it's Bo Bichette because he was still drafted high and he has provided. I mean, you're better off just literally playing anybody at this point. Like Zach McKinstry, come on down. Like you're a better option at this point than Bo Bichette.
And if you were to
No
look
shot at
on,
Zach McKinstry, by the way.
sure.
Salute to Zach McKinstry.
No, it's a shot at Bo Bichette there on that one for
Yeah,
sure.
it's a shot at Bo Bichette.
If you go on the mound, the first 2 as I'm looking at here for some numbers I think stand out. Probably Pablo Lopez, 4th highest ERA amongst starters that are qualified at over 5. And then I guess Kevin Gossman to an extent, but I think we're seeing the beginning of the decline for him. I think that's what it is with him. But those 2 on the mound, at least, far and away, more so than some of the other dudes there. And the last superlative we'll hand out here, biggest surprise. So it can be good surprise. It can be bad surprise. However you want to take this, you can. I'll actually kick it over to you first for this one.
All right. So I have 2, and they're both very positive. One, we already talked about one Braves pitcher. How about we go to another one? And I'm talking like later career resurgences today. I think some good stories. One, Reynaldo Lopez, starting pitcher for the Braves, who failed starter, turned reliever, good reliever over the last couple of years for the White Sox, right? Very good. Obviously, the starter thing didn't work out for him. Maybe just the wrong situation at the wrong time. But 8 years ago, Reynaldo Lopez made his debut. We are now age 30. Reynaldo Lopez went into the All-Star break, Colby, with a 1.88 ERA and striking out a batter per 9 innings. If you told me that as a starter at his age 30 season, I would tell you that you were doing drugs and I would ask you to get help, because that is not, I mean, it's not like he was a failed starter, turned into a good reliever. Not often do you see teams turn back to that player to go back to the rotation. And the Braves did, and they're reaping the rewards because he's been great. And my other one has been another former number 1 overall prospect in baseball. 10 years ago, maybe longer at this point. I don't remember when Jurickson Profar was the number 1 prospect in baseball a time ago, but Jurickson Profar has been, I mean, he was good last year. He was not this good last year.
Yeah.
He is hitting 305, 380 WOBA. He has 14 home runs, which matches he's 1 shy of the most home runs he's hit since 2019. He has 52 runs scored. He has 59 RBIs. We're 18 away from his career high. And another guy who's 31 years old playing the best baseball of his life. So salute to Reynaldo Lopez and Jurickson Profar as 2 guys that were on anybody's draft boards, because nobody at the age of 30 and 31 who are former top prospects have resurgences like these 2 players. So salute to both Reynaldo and Jurickson Profar. I hope they continued up. And all the Reynaldo Lopez peripheral numbers, not great, Bob. Not great. Jurickson Profar, they all look pretty good, especially considering he's playing home games in San Diego. So if they continue to have seasons like this, maybe they will get the contracts I think that we won at one point we thought they would see in their earlier days.
Yep. Lopez was 1. Actually, Profar is 1 as well. I'm going to go to a reliever as well. Kyle Finnegan's career year that he's having after the past couple of years. I mean, coming into draft, I mean, he had 28 saves last year. I'll give him that. 3.76 ERA and a 1.3 whip. Not like bad by any means, but it seemed like coming into drafts, Finnegan was kind of like I guess I have to get some saves, and let's hope for the best and see what happens with Kyle Finnegan. And all he does is come in this year. What? He's already at 25 saves. Shout out to Matt Sells' Nats for putting that forward. Would be career low 1.02 whip, 190 batting average against, 2-4 record. It is what it is, but 25 saves. And what I think what's really interesting, I have no clue what to make of this, but shout out to him using a split fingered fastball, resulting in a 20-degree launch angle against it. How that happens, beyond me. The splitter's ground ball pitch. He's using it for fly balls somehow. And then you look at the heat map and it's still lower in the zone. So no clue how he is doing that. But the split finger, for all intents and purposes, 186 batting average against, and he's getting a 33% whiff with it. 33% whiff rate, I should say. But Finnegan's just been great. He went from like 5 months ago to being the kind of we talk about with like there was the Joe Burrow meme is like, F it, he's down there somewhere. It's like,
Yeah.
F it, I need a closer. Kyle Finnegan, he's the last one here.
Right.
We'll take him and hope for the best. Who's now become to like yeah, I don't think I'm going to trade you Kyle Finnegan for this guy because I kind of like what he's doing. And when the Nats win, they're not winning by much. So he's in there for saves. But shout out Kyle Finnegan for what he's done. I have no clue kind of where to go from there, but he's been excellent, actually. And believe it or not, we always say you don't have to be on a good team to get saves. Kyle Finnegan is the third most saves.
Third most saves in baseball.
Yep. Major League Baseball, with the third most save opportunities as well. So shout out the Nationals. And then one other good surprise. I loved Mason Miller coming into the year. But 70 strikeouts and 39.2 innings is not, I didn't think it would be quite that high. It's impressive.
I mean, he throws 347 miles per hour. So.
With 38 inches of movement.
I mean, it's not fair. It is not fair.
Do you think he gets moved? Back to the trade deadline talk.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance. Oakland. I don't think anyone is safe on Oak. If teams like Oakland and the White Sox and the Tigers are shopping these players like religiously, like Luis Robert is young, Garrett Crochet is young, and if these guys are like available, then yeah, I don't think anyone's safe on any of these teams.
Do Mason Miller and Brent Rooker get involved in a package deal?
That would be a very intense package, I think, because that's a lot of power on both offense and on the mound. So I would say only one of them get moved. I suspect Rooker's moved before Mason Miller.
Yep.
Because I don't think you can justify a first 1.5 year player getting moved this early on. When you have this like new thing coming, right? Like you have this new ball, you're going to move to this smaller ballpark and you're moving out of Oakland and you're then going to move to Vegas apparently. So I don't think you can justify Miller as much as you can Rooker because he's like, again, 30-year-old lifetime, not this, but I think one of the two get moved.
Absolutely. And let's go ahead and wrap up this edition of Caught Stealing with a bold prediction for the second half. It can be player, it can be team, whatever you want it to be. The floor is yours at the _real_grande over on X.
So you mentioned this player, and you said this player has been a disappointment on the mound, and he has. Pitcher for the Minnesota Twins. He has been easily the most unlucky pitcher in baseball this year. His ERA, 5.11. His xFIP, 3.21. His expected ERA, 3.4. I am talking about Pablo Lopez, who has the same strikeout rate, less walks, almost similar ground ball rate as he did last year. Pablo Lopez in the second half will be a top 5 fantasy pitcher heading and win you a fantasy league. I was going to say he's going to be number 1, but I don't want to be crazy. I think Pablo Lopez is going to have some positive regression because all these metrics suggest that he's just been extremely unlucky. Now he needs to dodge the home run ball a little bit. The home runs are up this year. But everything else suggests Pablo Lopez has been the same guy as he was last year, just with worse luck. So Pablo Lopez is a top 5 pitcher remainder of season.
In that division, I selfishly want to kind of double down on myself and say that the Tigers do trade Skubal because I have an under on the Tigers win total, and I would love for him to get moved and get off that team because they're making things a little too interesting here in the first half for me. But I'm gonna do a little parlay with the my bold prediction here. So I'm going to go to the National League and the American League. National League, Pittsburgh Pirates make a move at the deadline. They're actually going to buy a little bit at the deadline. I know they've been linked to Taylor Ward a little bit. Pirates are going to take a wild card spot in the National League.
Ooh.
That's the first one. And if they can get healthy at the end, and somehow if they can get there, protect their dudes, get into a series where they can go Skeens, Jones, Keller. It's a tough little three to face. Then on the American League, currently out, but they're right within it, the Royals are going to take a wild card spot in the American League as well. So Royals, Pirates both get into the playoffs this year. We're going back to a couple years since these teams have been good, and it's going to be like that this year. Pirates, Royals take a wild card. Pablo Lopez has a bounce back second half. We handed out our fantasy superlatives. I know this is a fantasy baseball podcast, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the goodness, excuse me, in the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Make sure you go get your hands on that. I believe it's just fantasyalarm.com /guide or the QR code. Oh, right here.
Right there. Nailed it.
Yep, you can. This stupid pop cover or whatever this is. I'm like, why is my finger vanishing? There, I got to get in front of it. But yeah, so to make sure you check that out, a lot of stuff in there, a lot of Houston Texans talk. Shout out to the Texans first team to report for training camp, first team in, last team out for the season. That's how I'm viewing it as they go from there. But there's a lot of good stuff in there, coaching systems, offensive line analysis. Shout out to the big uglies up front. So make sure you get your paws on that. And of course, we're coming out of the break. There will be a lot of fantasy baseball goodness here at Fantasy Alarm. So make sure you check that out as well. Follow me on X at Colby R. Conway. Follow James at _real_grande. And of course, give a follow to Cells as well at the Salesman. Like and subscribe wherever you listen to it. And we will see you next week with the newest edition of Caught Stealing.